At this very moment, away from public view, top officials across the globe are engaged in discussions they would rather keep hidden. Ministers of finance are urgently dialing one another. Trade envoys are boarding long-haul flights for meetings that never reach headlines. And threading through every one of those quiet exchanges is a single country. Not the United States, not China, not Germany, Canada. This nation holds something increasingly recognized as one of the most decisive assets on Earth. It is not crude oil, it is food. And attached to that reality is a number so vast it forces a double take, $40 trillion. That figure represents the projected long-term worth of Canada's agricultural capacity. Only now is the international community beginning to grasp the full weight of what that implies. To understand the growing anxiety surrounding global food security, you have to look at how fragile the system already is. In 2022, when Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, the world was abruptly reminded of a critical truth it had long ignored. 2 countries in Eastern Europe were responsible for feeding a massive share of humanity. Together, Ukraine and Russia accounted for roughly 30% of global wheat exports, nearly 20% of corn shipments, and more than 50% of sunflower oil supply. When that flow was disrupted, panic spread quickly. Nations that had never truly feared food shortages suddenly found themselves scrambling for alternatives. Egypt, one of the largest wheat importers on the planet, shifted into crisis mode. Lebanon, already struggling economically, saw bread prices surge almost overnight. Across Africa and the Middle East, governments began making urgent calls, searching for reliable suppliers. Then something unexpected unfolded. A nation known more for consistency than headlines stepped forward. Canada increased its wheat exports significantly during that turbulent period. Grain terminals operated around the clock. Farmers across the prairies, who had quietly sustained production for generations, suddenly became a crucial lifeline for countries in distress. The world took notice. Yet that moment was only an early signal, a glimpse of something far larger taking shape. The deeper reality is not about a single conflict. It points to a long-term structural transformation in humanity's ability to produce food. And in that unfolding shift, Canada occupies a position unlike any other. Start with land. Arable land, the kind that can reliably produce crops, is one of the most limited strategic resources on Earth. It cannot be manufactured. It cannot be expanded through industrial means. And it is shrinking. Soil degradation, urban expansion, desertification, and water scarcity are steadily reducing the amount of usable farmland worldwide. Each year, millions of hectares of productive land disappear. Regions in China, North Africa, and the Middle East have already seen once fertile areas become unusable. Against this backdrop, Canada stands apart in a striking way. The country currently utilizes about 64 million hectares for agriculture, but that is only a portion of its true potential. When scientists and economists model future climate conditions, particularly in Canada's northern and boreal zones, the projections are remarkable. Areas that are currently too cold for consistent farming could gradually become viable. Over the coming decades, tens of millions of additional hectares may open up for cultivation. This is land that no other nation can replicate. Vast, resource-rich, and increasingly accessible. Then comes water. If land is one pillar of agriculture, freshwater is the other. And globally, it is under immense strain. Major food-producing regions are facing mounting pressure. India continues to deplete its groundwater reserves. In the United States, the Ogallala Aquifer beneath the Midwest is being drained at an alarming pace. California battles recurring conflicts over water allocation. Pakistan experiences unpredictable drought cycles that disrupt harvests. In contrast, Canada holds approximately 20% of the world's surface freshwater. In a future defined by scarcity, that figure carries enormous geopolitical weight. Water is poised to become in the 21st century what oil represented in the 20th, a resource that shapes power, alliances, and survival itself. When you combine these elements, expansive land potential, abundant water reserves, advanced agricultural expertise, a stable political framework, and direct access to both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, the scale of Canada's advantage becomes clear. The $40 trillion estimate is not speculative hype. It reflects serious evaluations conducted by institutions such as the World Bank, sovereign wealth funds, and long-term state investors who are already positioning themselves quietly within Canada's agricultural sector. What is unfolding in global food markets is unlike anything seen before. Countries that once assumed food would always be available are beginning to rethink that assumption. They are starting to view food through the same strategic lens once reserved for energy resources, with urgency, with long-term planning, with a sense of vulnerability. Now we arrive at a piece of the puzzle that brings everything together in a way few expect. When people think about Canadian agriculture, the usual images come to mind: wheat fields, canola crops, cattle. Those sectors are massive, no question. Canada ranks among the leading exporters of canola oil, durum wheat, lentils, and various pulses, But that surface view barely scratches what is truly unfolding. The deeper strength of Canada's agricultural system is tied directly to where global demand is heading, not just in the present, but decades into the future. Protein is emerging as the next major frontline in the global food equation. As middle classes expand rapidly across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, billions are moving out of poverty and into more stable income brackets. And history shows a clear pattern. As income rises, protein consumption climbs sharply. It happens everywhere, without exception. The problem is stark. The current global system cannot supply enough affordable and sustainable protein to meet that coming wave of demand. This is where Canada's position becomes incredibly important. It stands as one of the largest producers of pulse crops anywhere in the world. Lentils, chickpeas, dry peas, these are dense sources of plant-based protein that are both economical and scalable. And they thrive in the climate conditions of the Canadian prairies. Canada ships these crops to more than 150 countries. India alone purchases billions of dollars in Canadian lentils each year. Bangladesh, Turkey, Egypt, Colombia. The list continues across continents. These are not premium luxury items. They are essential staples for hundreds of millions of people. And Canada produces them efficiently, often at lower cost than competitors. Then there is canola, a story that remains surprisingly underappreciated. This crop was developed in Canada, even named after the country itself. Today it stands as one of the most widely used vegetable oils globally. It fills kitchens throughout Asia. It is a key ingredient in processed foods worldwide, and increasingly it is being evaluated as an input for renewable energy production. Canada generates approximately 20 million metric tons of canola annually. That single output translates into billions in export value each year. More importantly, its relevance is expanding, not fading, especially as energy systems evolve toward alternative fuels. So when analysts assign a $40 trillion valuation to Canada's agricultural future, they are not simply adding up current harvests. They are factoring in land that will become productive as climate conditions shift. They are accounting for freshwater reserves that remain stable while other regions face shortages. They are projecting demand for protein sources needed by a rapidly growing global middle class. Oils, grains, pulses, infrastructure, expertise, political stability, all of it is included. Across generations, across industries, across every layer of what sustains human life, that total reaches $40 trillion. And that number reflects not just potential, but necessity. Because much of the world will depend on what Canada can provide. Now we move deeper into the power dynamics already taking shape around this reality. This is no longer theoretical. It is happening now, largely out of public sight. Over the last decade, international interest in Canadian farmland has increased significantly. Sovereign wealth funds from Gulf nations, including Saudi Arabia and the UAE, have been actively diversifying their agricultural holdings across the globe. Canada appears on all of their strategic maps. Meanwhile, institutional investors from Asia, particularly Japan and South Korea, have been steadily building stakes in Canadian agricultural businesses. At the same time, entities connected to the Chinese state have attempted to acquire Canadian farmland and fertilizer assets. These moves have triggered national security reviews within Canada. Why this intense focus? Because these governments understand a simple but critical truth. Securing food supply is no longer just an economic concern. It is a core element of national security. In the 20th century, countries that ensured energy independence gained enormous geopolitical leverage. Today, forward-thinking nations are applying that same principle to food. And in this equation, Canada stands at the center. The Gulf states provide a clear example. For years, they have pursued what analysts describe as a global farmland acquisition strategy. Saudi Arabia, after exhausting much of its water reserves growing wheat domestically, has turned outward, purchasing agricultural land across Africa, Asia, and North America. The UAE has gone even further, embedding agricultural investment into the foundation of its national security planning. When these nations evaluate Canada, they see a rare combination: political stability, high productivity, abundant water, and a legal system that enforces contracts reliably. In a world where many agricultural investment destinations carry risks of corruption or instability, Canada stands out as unusually secure. This creates a complex challenge for Canadian policymakers. On one side, foreign capital brings investment, supports employment, and strengthens links to global supply chains. On the other, allowing critical agricultural assets to fall under external control raises serious national security concerns. Canada has been navigating this dilemma cautiously. Federal authorities have tightened certain investment screening measures. Some provinces have introduced limits on foreign ownership of farmland. Yet the pressure continues to build. If anything, it is accelerating. How Canada chooses to balance these competing forces will shape its role on the global stage for decades to come. And this brings us to three key relationships: the United States, China, and the Middle East. In each case, food plays a far more significant and complex role than most people realize. The agricultural machine of the United States is vast, deeply influential, and tightly woven into its political system. For decades, friction has existed between the two neighbors over products like softwood lumber, dairy, and a range of farm goods. Yet beneath those familiar disputes, a quieter transformation is unfolding. As climate patterns shift, American agricultural output is facing increasing strain. Drought conditions across the Southwest and Midwest are becoming both more frequent and more severe. Water stress is no longer a distant concern, it is a present reality. And as that pressure builds, the United States is finding itself more reliant on a stable and productive Canadian agricultural system than it publicly acknowledges. The interdependence runs deeper than most realize. Canadian canola feeds into American food processing industries. Wheat from Canada helps stabilize U.S. grain supply when gaps appear. Shared water systems link the two countries in ways that directly affect agricultural sustainability. Beneath the surface, a powerful mutual reliance is taking shape, quietly shifting leverage in the broader relationship. Now turn to China. The agricultural connection between Canada and China is massive, volatile, and strategically essential. China ranks among the largest buyers of Canadian agricultural exports. Shipments of canola, pork, soybeans, and seafood move steadily across the Pacific. But this relationship is anything but simple. In 2019, China imposed an effective ban on Canadian canola imports. The consequences were immediate. Canadian farmers saw billions of dollars in trade disappear almost overnight. It was a stark demonstration of how agricultural trade can be used as a geopolitical weapon. And yet, the relationship rebounded, not out of goodwill, but necessity. China must feed 1.4 billion people while operating with roughly 7% of the world's arable land. Its domestic production faces constant pressure from soil depletion, limited water, and expanding urban areas. Food imports are not optional for China. They are essential for stability. That dependence creates a subtle but meaningful form of leverage for Canada. It is not loud, but it is real. Then there is the Middle East, a dimension often overlooked but critically important. Across the Arab world, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the UAE, Yemen, Iraq, countries rely heavily on imported calories to sustain their populations. Egypt alone brings in around 60% of its wheat from abroad. Saudi Arabia depends on imports for nearly all of its food supply. These nations carry enormous strategic weight. Some hold vast oil wealth, others sit at key geopolitical crossroads. When global food systems are disrupted, they feel the shock immediately and intensely. Canada has steadily become a crucial supplier to this region. Wheat, lentils, and pulses grown in Canadian fields are shipped consistently into Middle Eastern markets. Agricultural firms from Canada have been strengthening ties across the Gulf. As populations grow and urbanization accelerates, reliance on external food sources will only increase, and Canada's role will deepen alongside it. What emerges from this is a broader truth. Canadian agriculture is evolving into an instrument of foreign policy. Every shipment of grain to Egypt carries diplomatic significance. Every long-term supply agreement with a Gulf nation strengthens strategic bonds. Countries rarely isolate or sanction those they depend on for survival. Through food, Canada is building a network of influence that operates quietly but effectively. So what lies ahead? What path does this trajectory follow, and why should Canadians care? Several critical factors will determine whether Canada fully realizes the value of its agricultural position. The first is infrastructure. The primary constraint is not production capacity, but transportation. Moving goods efficiently to global markets remains a persistent challenge. Rail systems, port facilities, and grain terminals have faced sustained pressure for years. Congestion at major export hubs like Vancouver and Prince Rupert has already cost billions in missed opportunities. Addressing these bottlenecks may not capture headlines, but it is absolutely vital. If Canada is to function as a global food supplier, its logistics network must keep pace. Next comes technology. Canadian farming is already highly advanced, yet the global race in agricultural innovation is accelerating. Staying competitive will require continued investment in research and development. Advances in agri-tech are not optional. They are strategic necessities. Finally, policy will play a defining role. Regulatory frameworks must evolve to match the scale of opportunity. That includes carefully managing foreign investment to ensure critical assets remain under national control. It also means pursuing trade strategies that open new markets while safeguarding domestic supply. And it requires serious commitment to closing infrastructure gaps that limit growth. Canada holds an extraordinary set of advantages. The real question is whether its leadership is prepared to act boldly enough to fully leverage them. Here is the core reality. The world is entering a prolonged period of food insecurity. Climate change, water depletion, soil degradation, population growth, and geopolitical instability are converging. Together, they are transforming food into the most critical strategic resource of the coming decades. In that landscape, Canada stands in a uniquely strong position. It possesses the land, it has the water, it brings the expertise, the stability, and access to global markets. The $40 trillion valuation is not inflated. If anything, it may represent a baseline, and the world understands this. That is why attention is turning toward Canada. Sovereign wealth funds are monitoring farmland. Nations from the Middle East to Asia are strengthening agricultural partnerships with Canadian exporters. This era of Canadian food dominance is not something on the horizon. It has already begun. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.